Ms. Telford, did the Prime Minister receive a series of briefings from Canada's National Spy Agency beginning in January 2022 on Beijing's election interference, specifically in the 2019 election?
I believe you received from the National Security and Intelligence Advisor and from the Privy Council Office a listing of briefings that the Prime Minister has received on the subject.
Yes, you're referring to the document that was undertaken by the National Security Officer, Jody Thomas, on March the 1st of this year that we received this morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I've looked at this, and there's no indication about any briefings in January of 2022. But noteworthy, the commentary on the beginning of page number 1 indicates the list is not exhaustive, as the records are not complete in all cases. And this only represents formal briefings as opposed to informal briefings. So I'll ask the question again. Did the Prime Minister receive a series of briefings beginning in January 2022 on Beijing's election interference in the 2019 election? Yes or no?
I think, Madam Chair, the answer may have been given in the question, which is that in the preamble in the memo, it talks about how there's all kinds of conversations that go on about some of these topics that can't all be captured in terms of formal briefings, and you have the list of formal briefings that are provided in the memo.
So I could take that as a yes, that he would have received some informal briefings in and around that time frame, January of 2022, as reported by Global News on November the 7th of 2022.
I can't speak specifically to what was discussed in briefings over the course of those months and whether it was related to what was in the reporting.
Again, Ms. Telford, I'm not asking for specifics. I'm asking you to confirm that it's more than likely, in fact, it did happen, that he would have received briefings along those lines in January of 2022, notwithstanding that it's not repeated in this particular document that we got today.
Did and more than likely, in my experience, are different things. I think it is quite possible that there were discussions throughout that time period around foreign interference. As I think the Prime Minister said yesterday, we have talked about these subjects a lot over many years because there's been a lot of activity and a lot of work that this government has done on this front.
And the Prime Minister was briefed on China's Toronto consulate directing a large clandestine transfer of funds to at least 11 federal election candidates and numerous Beijing operatives who worked as their campaign staffers. That was the subject matter of those series of briefings in January of 2022. Are you confirming that?
No, Madam Speaker, I can't, unfortunately, I can't provide information about what I have or have not been briefed on in an intelligence setting or in a public setting about intelligence. But what I can remind the members through you, Madam Chair, of is what the NSIA said when she was here, actually on March 1st at this very committee, and she said the connection that was being made between 11 candidates and funds that you're describing, that was inaccurate.
If this was completely inaccurate, if this story of Global News on November the 7th was completely inaccurate, you would have said so. Your Prime Minister would have said so. Your members of Cabinet would have said so. So I'm asking you specifically, apart from the issue of clandestine transfers to 11 candidates, the other subject matter of those briefings, is that false? Is that inaccurate in any way?
I'm sorry, you might have to clarify the question, Madam Chair.
You've highlighted that there was an issue with respect to the Prime Minister never receiving any information respect to the transfer of monies to specific candidates. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the broader description of evidence and intelligence that was shared with the Prime Minister in a series of briefings in January 2022, as reported by Global News. Is that inaccurate?
So, Madam Speaker, I can't speak to the reporting that Global News spoke about. I can speak to my experience, which is that there have been a lot of conversations over many years. It's why all the different mechanisms that I outlined were put in place leading into the 2019 election and the 2021 election. There were further steps taken in between those two elections.
Thank you. Did the Privy Council Office prepare a document entitled Special Report, date stamped January 2022? Yes or no?
I can't speak to that
Why?
because I'm not sure what document you're referencing. If you can give me some more information, I probably still won't be able to confirm whether or not it's something I saw, but I'd be happy to try.
It was reported in the Global News of March the 8th. It was reviewed by Sam Cooper, the reporter. It was date stamped and finalized, suggesting it was intended to be read by the Prime Minister and senior aides, including yourself. It was derived from 100 CSIS reports from investigations beginning in January 2019 and produced by the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat, a division of the PCO. It was a part of a series of briefings beginning in January 2022, again confirming the large clandestine transfer of funds earmarked for the federal election from the consulate in Toronto, which transferred that funds to an elected provincial government official via a staff member of a 2019 federal candidate. You are responsible ultimately for the PCO. The PCO is the arm of the Prime Minister. It's his own department. They report to you. You control the PMO. Are you suggesting that this special report, as prepared by the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat, did not occur?
Okay, Ms. Telford, sorry, before I continue, I think as members of Parliament, we've all served in the House. And when you suggest you are referring to the chair in this role.
Yes, I
Mr.
am.
Prock, you are referring to me.
No, I'm not referring to you. Through you, Madam Chair.
I was hoping so. I
Through
did not
you.
hear those important through you two
Yes,
words.
thank you.
But I did appreciate for the most part the exchange. And I think it was nice that we were able to let pauses so the interpreters can do their work. But if we were going to be at a spot that we are perhaps putting words in other people's mouths, then I need us to go through the chair.
Right. Madam Chair, will you allow the witness to answer the question?
It will be coming out of possible later time, but yes, I would love to do that. Ms. Telford.
So I should answer now? Okay. I just want to clarify because you, through the chair, the member was asserting a number of things about what I do, and I want to go back to what I said in my opening statement about my role. The Privy Council Office does not report to me. I manage the Prime Minister's office. I do, however, work very closely with the Privy Council Office, and there's some extraordinary public servants in there, including one who reports directly to the Prime Minister, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor. And I want to remind the room again, Madam Chair, of what she said, which was that the connection that was being made between the 11 candidates and essentially much of what you're saying there was inaccurate.
Ms. Telford, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Brock provided the context of the special report, date stamped January of 2022. So now that he has provided that context, can you confirm that the Prime Minister received that document and did he read it?
So in terms of the specific document that you're referencing that was mentioned in reporting, Madam Chair, that and that the previous member was mentioning, I can't speak to whether or not we've been briefed on any specific documents or any specific subjects. But taking a step back from that and to the member's second part of his question, of course the Prime Minister reads any documents he does receive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Telford, when was the Prime Minister first briefed about Beijing's election interference in the 2019 election? When?
So you've received from, Madam Speaker, the committee has received from the NSIA the list of formal briefings that was put together as best everybody could in terms of formal briefings on subjects to do with election foreign interference.
Ms. Telford, respectfully, through you, Madam Chair, I'm not just asking about formal briefings. I'm asking when did the Prime Minister become aware of Beijing's election interference in the 2019 election? Just the date, please. It's been 5 months. It's been repeatedly asked. You're the top official in the Prime Minister's office. Canadians deserve to know when he first learned about it. Could you please answer?
Madam Speaker, I would just Madam Chair, I would take a step back and just say this has been an ongoing conversation over many months and years as to what prospects were of potential foreign interference. It's why these different organizations were in place. It's why there was a report that came out of the 2019 campaign or election.
Again, Ms. Telford, I want to be clear that Canadians deserve a date. So maybe to provide some, to provide further clarity, the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat of the PCO prepared a daily foreign intelligence brief dated February 21st, 2020, in which that document has been produced to this committee, a heavily redacted version of that document. It speaks of, quote, subtle but effective interference networks in the context of Beijing and its interference in the 2019 election. It speaks of, quote, investigations into activities linked to the Canadian federal election in 2019 reveal an active foreign interference network. On what date did the Prime Minister receive this document?
I could not tell you what date he did or didn't receive a document.
Did the Prime Minister receive that document?
I don't have that information in front of me in terms of that specific document you're holding.
You don't have any information about that document. Now, it was a daily and foreign intelligence brief through you, Madam Chair. It was a daily foreign intelligence brief. Ms. Thomas said that it would have been in the Prime Minister's daily reading material. Would she be wrong?
It may have been. I am not suggesting she's wrong. It's that I can't speak to where he was that day. Sometimes briefs come in a whole bunch of different formats because those kinds of pieces of information are not just floating around. So I don't know whether he got a verbal brief that day, whether he got a weekly wrap-up that week, or whether this was a daily one that he had on his desk.
This document has been widely reported. It's one of the very few documents that have been produced to this committee, and it's highly relevant to the question of what the Prime Minister knew and when he knew about Beijing's election interference. And your inability, your refusal to answer whether the Prime Minister had, in fact, read this document, was briefed about it, is troubling. It doesn't inspire confidence. In fact, it invites suspicion. And perhaps your unwillingness to confirm that is because, as Global News has reported, that document spoke of, quote, foreign interference networks in the Greater Toronto Area that implicate at least 11 candidates in the 2019 election, that Beijing's Toronto consulate was involved, and that it involved the clandestine transfer of funds. So, in other words, the Prime Minister seemingly knew as early as February of 2020 about candidates. Why has he misled Canadians for the past 5 months?
So a couple of things, Madam Chair, is one, everything the Prime Minister receives, he spends a lot of time with, and he most definitely reads. So I can confirm that if they are documents that he received, he absolutely read them. Second, that he's briefed on matters of foreign interference and matters of election foreign interference as per the documents you have received on a regular and ongoing basis. And third, on the specifics of what you were referencing there, I can't get into, unfortunately, in this public setting, what was or wasn't briefed on in the level of specificity you'd like.
Ms. Telford, I read an article from February 17th, which talked about a Chinese strategy to influence the 2021 Canadian election. These are information that Canadians have seen published. The Globe and Mail saw the documents from CSIS. Did the Prime Minister also see these documents?
I can't, unfortunately, speak to specifics of what the Prime Minister has or has not been briefed on in all of this. But as I said before, in taking a step back from the specifics of your question, the Prime Minister has been briefed regularly and gets information in a variety of different ways on what was happening around election interference in the last 2 elections.
Merci, vous avez...
Thank you. You already said that. Did you see these documents?
The answer would be the same for me.
Des documents...
The documents that were shared with our Five Eyes allies, with the governments of France and the Germans, that were reported on in the Globe and Mail, that Canadians were made aware of in newspaper articles. The Prime Minister certainly saw these documents, did he not?
As I said, I can't get into what the Prime Minister has or has not been briefed on in terms of specifics of intelligence. It's frustrating, I know, for me as well, but it's for very important reasons that I laid out in my opening statement.
Je vais essayer de vous aider.
I'm trying to help you, Ms. Telford. In the days that followed the report in the February 17th by the Globe and Mail, the Prime Minister himself said in response to questions on these documents, "We are very concerned by the leaks, particularly because there is so much inaccuracy in the leaks." So the Prime Minister himself commented on the content of this report. What revelations by the report of February 17th were inaccurate, as the Prime Minister said?
So I've already referenced over the course of the committee today, Madam Chair, at least one inaccuracy that the NSIA has spoken to from reporting more broadly. I can't, unfortunately, go further than where the NSIA went or the director of CSIS went when they were speaking before the committee.
On va passer en revue les faits.
We'll review the facts reported by the Globe and Mail, Ms. Telford, because these reports are drawn from a series of intelligence collection documents. The first fact, the objectives of Beijing were to bring in a minority government. Was that inaccurate? Was that what the Prime Minister was referring to as being inaccurate?
There have been a number of things we've been following up, obviously, on the reporting throughout the last number of months, and there have been a number of things that don't add up in the way that we know them or that
Merci.
officials are able to tell us about.
Thank you. I will raise another fact. The objectives of Beijing were to damage Conservative candidates that were seen as being harmful to its objectives. Did the Prime Minister see that as inaccurate as well?
I would take a step back to where Canada was in its relations with China going into the 2019 and 2021 elections. They were probably at their lowest point.
Madame Telford.
Ms. Telford, the question was,
Just 'cause you
this is something that I didn't want to do, but the time for interpreters will not be taken out of your time. I will give it to you. If we could take a bit more time and continue as we are doing, I think that would be very good. So I understand very well that you have questions, and I have both official languages. My first language is Punjabi. It takes a bit longer to say things in that language, so I know you don't speak it, but you speak French. So I will give you time. If you could not interrupt, that would be better. Is that okay? Okay. So, Madame Telford, the Beijing's tactics were given cash donations to those. Was that deemed inaccurate by the Prime Minister?
Well, as it relates to the stories around the 11 candidates, I think you've already heard me repeatedly, Madam Chair, talk about how both the NSIA and the Prime Minister have spoken to that and to where they saw a gap and an inaccuracy in the reporting.
Beijing was asking companies to hire international students and to have them hired on summer election campaigns. Was that deemed to be inaccurate by the Prime Minister?
I can't get into going further than they did. I can, in terms of the NSIA, the director of CSIS, the many other experts that have come before you on these issues.
Deux dernières questions.
Two last questions, Madam Chair. Some political campaigns were seeing a difference between the donation and the amount reimbursed. Is that deemed inaccurate by the Prime Minister?
I would just say on matters related to fundraising and donations, Madam Chair, and I think all members here are very familiar with this. I certainly am from my days as a past campaign director. There are very robust election finance laws in this country, and actually they were made even more robust and transparent under this government. And if there were concerns there are methods to investigate any fundraising anomalies that are seen or alleged to have happened.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Telford, the Prime Minister is very quick to reveal when information is false. And there is another thing that I would like to talk about in the article. The diplomats from the Beijing consulates, including former heads of consulates, were made statements that were false. Did he deem this inaccurate when there was so much inaccuracy in these articles that he commented on the report, the CSIS report himself, and you refused to make any comments on them yourself?
Madam Chair, I appreciate that we are now quick to respond to things when I thought we had been told many times we have not been quick to respond to things in the past. And part of the reason we haven't always been able to be as quick as, boy, we wish we all could be in responding to questions on this is because this information and this subject matter is just so very important, that it's so important, as I said in the opening statement, that when you're getting fragments of information, not only to figure out what those fragments are and where they situate, but to put them into a broader context. And being able to figure out what you can and can't say publicly is not something that I should be sitting here doing. And that's why I set out in the beginning, I've got to respect the boundaries that were set by the National Security and Intelligence Advisor and the Director of CSIS when they were here before me.
In the document received from the Privy Council Office, the Prime Minister's Department, that was requested on March the 2nd, it was received by this committee this morning. It states that on September 28th, that cleared Liberal Party of Canada representatives were given a security briefing. Who were the senior Liberal Party officials who were part of that briefing?
I was not. And I believe you have invited to this committee the national campaign directors of the 2019 and 2021 campaigns, so they can speak to that in more detail.
Do you know who the cleared representatives were for the Liberal Party?
I do know that Azam Ismail, who you have invited to the committee, was one of those cleared representatives.
Okay. Was Zita Astervaz one of those cleared individuals?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I can't say that with absolute certainty, but I don't believe so.
To your knowledge, has it been brought to your attention since that time that the then candidate for Don Valley North was made aware of any of the contents of any of the briefings given to cleared officials with the Liberal Party?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following. Was he?
Well, did the candidate for Don Valley North, to your knowledge, was he given a readout or made aware of the contents of the briefing that was given to the cleared officials with the Liberal Party?
So, Madam Chair, not to my knowledge, but I was not involved in that at all during the campaigns. I was on a full-time leave for both campaigns on the road with the Prime Minister for the whole campaign, so these were things managed by headquarters.
Okay. The 25 ridings in the GTA, who would have been responsible for them, to the best of your knowledge, during the campaign on behalf of the party?
I'm not sure I'm understanding again, Madam Chair. Do you mean in terms of who was kind of the campaign coordinator for the GTA?
Yeah, regional organizer.
I'm not even sure. I'm not the best person to speak to that. I really, if you wanted to ask me about 2015, I could help you out. But you're going to need to talk to the 2019 or 2021 campaign directors. I'm not even sure how it was carved up within the GTA.
Okay, so that's not something that you would have known in your capacity on that campaign?
No, I'm sure I know the person, but I'm not sure which person it was or if it was even done in the way that you're describing.
Okay, and your role on the campaign was?
I was on the bus, as they say, or on the plane throughout the entirety of the campaign in 2019 and 21.
Would you have access to those names now if you asked?
Yes, I'm sure I could follow up. Yes.
Would you undertake to provide those names, the name of the individuals responsible for the GTA during the 2019 election campaign? Could you provide those to the committee?
So, Madam Chair, I can follow up on government side, though, I would encourage the parliamentary committee, since you have the national campaign directors from those campaigns coming, that it's probably more appropriate to be coming from the party side.
Yep. But just to be clear, you're going to.
But I'll undertake. I will take it back and
Thank
see
you very
what I can
much.
do.
So there were media reports that there was an urgent briefing given to the cleared Liberal Party officials. And it would be helpful to know, again, in that same context, we will ask the Liberal Party officials when they come what their list of cleared officials were. If you could make the same inquiry and provide that information to us, and you've indicated to the affirmative?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That would be incredibly helpful. Because this speaks to, of course, the concern that information was made available to these officials who would then, it would be reasonably expected that they provided it to the Prime Minister, which is what you said. If you receive the information, you share that information with the Prime Minister.
Yes, and Madam Chair, I have every confidence that they would talk to the Prime Minister about anything they found out.
Did you recommend to the Prime Minister against removing the candidate from Don Valley North as a candidate for election?
Madam Chair, the member that's being discussed stepped outside of caucus quite recently, so I'm not sure what is being referred to.
The question is exactly as stated. It's if you recommended when the candidate for Don Valley North was a candidate for election, if you recommended against his removal from the slate of candidates running for the Liberal Party.
What I can say is I was never involved in a conversation on the subject.
Okay. Conversations did occur.
No, I'm saying I was not privy to a conversation. I don't have an answer for you on this because there was no conversation that I was part of on this subject.
Ms. Telford, on February 13th, the Globe and Mail reported that in 2019, a CSIS briefing to the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who of course is you, warned about the connection that the former Liberal MPP for Markham Unionville had to the Beijing consular. The nation's spy agency, CSIS, told the Prime Minister's office and you that the MPP should be, quote, on your radar, and that, quote, someone should reach out to Mary Ng to be extra careful, end quote. As he was her campaign co-chair, of course, in 2017 and was lined up to do the same job in 2019, did the Prime Minister's office advise the current Minister of Trade to distance herself from the former Liberal MPP from Markham Unionville?
So a couple of things on that. I believe the Minister has already spoken to the fact that the individual you're talking about was not a co-chair of her campaigns. Two, I can't get into, as I've said before, I can't get into the specifics of what you're describing as to whether it did or did not happen, whether we were or weren't briefed on it. But what I can, just to take a quick step back and try to give you a little more than that, is
it's okay.
Memos, though, usually don't make those recommendations.
So
that might be helpful for you to know.
Just for clarity, he was in fact her campaign co-chair in 2017, so you cannot deny that. And was lined up for 2019, but then promptly dropped within a matter of time of this report being released. So that's just an interesting fact for the public to consider. I would also remind you, Ms. Telford, that you do have the ability to talk about the extent and the timing of briefings. And the reason I say that is actually because intelligence and security expert Wesley Wark, who served for 2 terms in the Prime Minister's advisory with regards to intelligence and security, has said so. So if he says that you can provide those details, I'll take his word over yours. So let's just start on that platform, shall we?
No. I'm going to pause your time.
That's great.
I'm not sure what's happening here. And I feel like we've been doing a really good job. I was actually saying that because the line of questioning's been so fruitful that perhaps we should try to get in a little bit of extra time past 2 o'clock just to make sure that we do get the information that we are requesting. As I said at the top of the meeting, as I have repeated, this is not a courtroom. It's a procedure in House Affairs Committee where members of Parliament sit and we do important work. Comments are made through the chair. And Mrs. Thomas, as someone who has chaired committees very well, you know very well the important work we do as chairs. So I will ask you that comments be made through the chair. The floor is back yours.
Through the chair, did anybody from the Prime Minister's office or the Liberal Party headquarters relay any information to the current Minister of Trade regarding CSIS warnings about the former Liberal MPP from Markham Unionville?
So, Madam Chair, I would encourage the members, if they have questions on the Minister Ng and her local campaigns, to raise them with her. I do believe she's on the public record, though, already on these questions. And I'm not sure things were laid out the way I understand them by the member in terms of those experiences. And the thing I was starting to try to say earlier that I think might be useful for the member to know is that recommendations don't tend to come to us saying you should go and do the threat reduction measure if there's ever one that's recommended. And so that's just something to consider in terms of how you are presenting, or sorry, Madam Chair, how the member is presenting certain things as facts that are certainly not the way that I have experienced things.
Madam Chair, I wonder if if Ms. Telford considered the Minister of Small Business a close friend.
Madam Chair, yes, I do.
So I'm wondering then why the individual testifying would not inform Ms. Ng about the troubling information that CSIS provided.
Madam Speaker, I would take you and the members back to what I said in the opening statement. Even what we share between other cleared individuals within government is something that we have to be incredibly sensitive and careful about. And threat reduction measures, if they are deemed as something that are necessary, is something that security officials do, not political staff.
In June 2017, at Ms. Telford's request, the National Security Advisor prepared a document entitled, quote, Memorandum to the Prime Minister. And a draft of this memo was viewed by Global News, and it states that Beijing agents were assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices. I'm wondering what prompted Ms. Telford to request this memo.
So as I said in my opening statement, I ask a lot of questions in a lot of meetings, and sometimes my name also gets attached to things, even when it's not coming directly with me, I have learned over time. But what I would just say, Madam Speaker, while I can't speak to the specifics of this memo for the reasons I've said previously, my understanding through the reporting is that this was an unsigned memo, and it's particularly strange and not my experience to receive unsigned memos in PMO.
So I'm wondering then, through you, Chair, did the Prime Minister receive the memo? It was requested.
Madam Chair, my previous answer stands for that question as well.
10 weeks before the 2021 election, Bob Soroya, the then Member of Parliament for Markham Unionville, received a cryptic and threatening text message from Beijing's Consul General in Toronto, suggesting that he would no longer be a Member of Parliament after the 2021 election. Were you, the Prime Minister, or anyone in the PMO briefed or otherwise have knowledge about that text message?
Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I can't speak to this information, and I can't speak to that information.
You
I'm sorry.
can't speak to the information because you don't know? Why can't you speak to this information?
No, and because, as I said before, as frustrating as it is for all of us, I can't get into confirming, let alone denying information and going beyond the bounds of the security heads who were here before me.
Well, I find that very, very interesting that you will not confirm whether you have knowledge of that text message. I'll ask an even broader question. Do you have any knowledge of interference by Beijing in the 2021 election in the riding of Markham-Unionville?
I can't speak to specific pieces of information. As you know, I was not the cleared representative during the campaign. Sorry, as through the chair, the member knows I was not the cleared representative during the campaign. But in terms of what I have been briefed on subsequent to the campaign, and you will have seen a lot of this come out of the review of the panel's work during the 2021 campaign. So broadly speaking, yes, I have been briefed on attempted interference and influence during the last elections.
And that occurred in the riding of Markham-Unionville, yes or no?
I can't speak to that, Madam Chair, in terms of the specifics.
Another convenient non-answer. Ms. Telford, through you, Madam Chair, when I asked you in my previous round about when the Prime Minister first learned about Beijing's interference in the 2019 election, you didn't answer it. You said it's part of an ongoing conversation. You conveniently refused to even acknowledge your knowledge, your familiarity with one of the very few documents that has been produced by the Prime Minister's own department, the PCO, dated February 21st, 2020, that spoke about a subtle but effective interference network in the 2019 election. So in the interests of transparency, Canadians deserve to know, when did those conversations begin?
So in the same efforts, Madam Chair, of transparency, conversations about potential election interference, attempts at began long before the 2019 campaign. That's why steps were taken actually to protect the 2019, and then more steps were taken in order to protect the 2021 campaign. And I think it's really important that it be said in this committee, because it should be said as many times as possible, that experts, very senior, trusted public servants have come out saying that those elections were fair.
Madam Chair, no one is disputing that the overall outcome of the election in 2019 and 2021 were not affected by Beijing's interference, but if even one riding was impacted, that is a problem. You acknowledge that there was interference by Beijing in the 2019 and 2021 election. I hope you at least acknowledge that much, Ms. Telford.
Madam Chair, I assume when the member talks about Beijing all the time, he's speaking about China foreign interference. And yes, I have acknowledged that right in the opening statement, that there was foreign interference by a number of states, and that's written into the reports as well.
Very good, Madam Chair. Then, Ms. Telford, through you, Madam Chair, the advice of CSIS to the Prime Minister is that the policy of a government in response to foreign interference should be grounded in sunlight and transparency, and that such interference be made known to the public. That was provided in a briefing to him on January 21st, 2021, another one of the few documents produced to this committee. Why is it that in the face of your acknowledgement of Beijing's election interference and the advice that CSIS provided to make such foreign interference known, the Prime Minister instead kept Canadians in the dark?
Madam Chair, I will be quick on that and just say, it's rare for the member and I to agree on anything, but what we can agree on is the importance for transparency and sunlight and growing confidence for Canadians in our institutions. And it's for that reason that our government took steps to protect the elections that had never been taken before.
Ms. Telford, earlier today, my colleague, Mr. Berthold, asked you about the Globe and Mail story of February 17, 23, regarding Beijing's objectives in the 21 election. The Prime Minister is on record as saying that the report was full of inaccuracies without denying the existence of the report and not identifying what in the report was inaccurate. My colleague asked you that question. In your opinion, what was inaccurate about that report? You couldn't confirm. My belief is if the report was full of inaccuracies, you would identify those inaccuracies, or if the report was completely false, you would say so. So I'm giving you the opportunity now. Is the report truthful or not?
So, Madam Chair, maybe I'll just give a crack at explaining why it is that whether or not it's inaccurate, I can't answer. Because if I started to answer the things that were either missing or inaccurate in some of the specific questions that you're getting into, it is as much as confirming than some of the other things that you might be raising.
Thank you. I believe the most damning fact in that report is that Beijing's objectives in the 21 election were to help the Liberals secure a minority government and to defeat certain Conservative candidates. Do you accept that? Do you believe that to be the case?
Madam Chair, my experience going into both of the last two elections was that our relations with China were at their lowest point, where I was working day and night alongside many, many, many other incredible Canadians to try to bring home the two Michaels, who it was just amazing to see in Parliament when President Biden was here
Thank you,
recently.
Ms. Telford. CSIS tracked specifically the surrounding circumstances involving the former Consul General in Vancouver, her name being Tong Zhiling, who held the post during the 21 election. In fact, CSIS reported that she was doing victory laps, bragging about how her role was to defeat certain Conservative candidates. You are aware of that. Is that inaccurate?
Madam Chair, I'm aware of the reporting on this matter, and I can't speak to what different countries' ambassadors and consul generals have said.
The Prime Minister was aware of this information?
The Prime Minister is also
If you are aware
the
of it, the Prime
reporting-
Minister is aware of
Pausing.
it, correct?
The reporting, Madam Chair.
Pausing. You know, friends, colleagues, this just takes away from our time. That's all we lose. We all lose time. No one here is new. One person's going to speak at a time. It was not a courtroom at the beginning of this meeting. It still has not become one. It is the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which I know has really high ratings. I'm sure there's many people watching, and they want to see the important work that we do here in the House of Commons. Mr. Brock.
The victory lap that she was bragging about, is that false?
Madam Chair.
Yes or no? Is it false?
I
It's a
can
simple
only
question.
speak to the fact that I'm aware of this through.
Mr. Brock, it's very simple. We have someone coming to appear today to provide us information. What may be simple to you might not be simple to somebody else. I don't know. I've never been a chief of staff to the Prime Minister. I'm not sure if you have. So I'm going to ask Mr. Brock
Yes.
that we permit Ms. Telford to answer, and when she gives a quick answer, and Ms. Telford, I have to commend you. Your answers have been quite short compared to most witnesses, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Telford, and it will be returned to you, Mr. Brock.
Madam
if I
Chair,
have to
just for clarification, Madam Chair, the question was premised with a yes or a no. I didn't get a yes or a no, and that's why I referred to it as a simple question.
So within the House of Commons, Mr. Brock, as you know, if there is unwritten rules, and oftentimes the amount of time that is consumed for the question or comment is provided to the person to answer, and I think it's only fair that the witness be able to answer. So I recognize what the premise was. If you look at my premise, it's been, let's have a functional meeting and one person speak at a time. I've been doing this for many meetings. I've not yet achieved that, and I will keep trying.
Madam Chair, how
so
much
right
ti-
now, Mr. Brock, you will have 1 minute left, first starting with Ms. Telford.
CSIS reported a month after the 21 election, it was well known within the Chinese-Canadian community of British Columbia that Ms. Tong wanted the Liberal Party to win the 21 election. Is that false?
I think, Madam Chair, you'll know my answer on this, which is that I can't speak to
Thank you.
specifics. on
CSIS reports reveal that Ms. Tong and former counsel Wang Jin made discreet and subtle efforts to encourage members of Chinese-Canadian organizations to rally votes for the Liberals and defeat Conservatives. Is that false?
Madam Chair, I think what I would just remind the members is something I said in the opening, and that's come up throughout this committee, actually, which is that interference in elections has an impact on all political parties.
In November 21, CSIS reported that Ms. Tong described former MP Kenny Chiu as a vocal distractor when discussing his defeat in the 21 election. She also is reported to have said that Mr. Chiu's loss proved that their strategy and tactics were good and contributed to achieving their goals. Is that false? Is that inaccurate?
Madam Chair, I'm going to have to give a similar answer, but I would say that it's important to remind people, because of the insinuations I think coming through from the member, that the election has been examined by experts, and they have deemed it as one that was free and fair.
I believe what we heard today then from Ms. Telford and the testimony that she provided was the following. Today she was asked a series of very simple questions. They were questions that did not require top security clearance. And yet there was a failure to give proper answers. We asked questions with regards to the Prime Minister's knowledge. We asked questions about the briefings that he received. We asked questions with regard to whether or not he was informed concerning Beijing's interference in our elections. Ms. Telford refused to provide simple answers to these very simple questions. We know that numerous intelligence documents were made available to the media and have been reported to the public. We referenced those documents throughout our questions today, and again, the questions that we put forward were skirted or altogether shot down. Now, what's quite convenient is that Ms. Telford cannot confirm the existence of documents that contain, of course, the most damning information concerning the Prime Minister. And with that, I'm talking about documents that reveal Beijing's interference in our elections, Beijing's motivation to elect Liberals to the House of Commons by providing paid staff members to these campaigns, as well as funneling hidden, secret, and illegal money to them. Ms. Telford was not able to discuss these documents conveniently. What's interesting, however, is that Ms. Telford had no problem whatsoever denying the existence of some documents. But when it came to this document, the document that shows Beijing's interference in order to elect Liberals, Ms. Telford did not deny the existence of that one. So I'll allow her silence to speak for itself. However, Ms. Telford also told us that the Prime Minister is briefed regularly. Ms. Telford also told us that she is the Prime Minister's right-hand individual, constantly with him. That, and I'll quote directly, the Prime Minister reads everything, and, quote, there is nothing that is ever kept from the Prime Minister, end quote. So given the fact that the Prime Minister reads everything and that nothing is ever kept from him, the committee must then assume that the Prime Minister was aware and that the Prime Minister chose to actively ignore and avoid the information, the briefings, and the warnings that were given to him by our top security and intelligence agency in this country when it comes to Beijing's interference. And one must conclude that the only reason to turn a blind eye to such information is certainly not in the best interest of the Canadian electorate, and so therefore only in the best interest of the Liberal Party of Canada, which of course benefited from this interference both by getting money and paid staff in order to secure their ridings. I'll leave it there.
Madam Chair,
There was no question, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Telford.
Madam Chair, it's interesting that I was accused of silence, then told I wasn't asked a question when I was trying to answer, and further was then being quoted in the statement that was just made. So apparently I did say something. And Madam Chair, I would just say that what was being alleged, or at least a part of what was being alleged there, were infractions of Elections Canada law, and there are mechanisms for those things to be investigated. And so I would just suggest that you be speaking to the appropriate agencies about what, if anything, should be happening on those fronts if those things are the case. And I think the member probably could have written this, Madam Chair, beforehand, and that was one of the reasons that I was concerned about, and I think many were concerned about whether or not it was the appropriate thing for me to be coming to this committee.